Welcome aboard, everybody. If you gather on in, we're going to start our Ask an Expert talk for today. My name's Dik Daso. I'm the curator for the Modern Military Aircraft Collection here. We work downtown, we work here, we work everywhere. Out in Garber, we're looking forward to opening our new restoration building right out behind this building called Phase 2. Sometime next year, you'll be able to look out the mezzanine right into the shop floor and watch our folks do the magic they do with these airplanes and spacecraft. But for today, we're going to spend a little time talking about something that you either love or you hate in the museum world, and that's popular culture items. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what that means to us today and what it meant a long time ago. And normally I would make you walk the whole way with me, but I'm not going to do that today. We're going to go right over to that little display screen in the Cold War exhibit area, and we're going to do our Ask an Expert talk on popular culture and computational power today. And we got 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll take some questions. And then at the end, if you really want to hang around and talk about some Transformers things, I'll do that with you as well. So off we go. As I said, today we're going to talk a little bit about popular culture, and what does that mean? Well, it's really an idea, a set of ideas that are accepted generally in the population about something, whether it's an event or a person, but something that has a very popular underpinning that a lot of people understand, know things about. It's influenced a lot by the media in a positive way generally, and it permeates our everyday life, whether it's furniture that's influenced by an event or other items that we use daily or accept to be things of common use. So that's one way to look at popular culture, but another, a little more cynical view is that it's ideas about something that are dumbed down for all us regular folk to understand. So there's two different looks at popular culture in the historical community, particularly, that are a little more academic versus a little more simple. So it has both a positive and a negative connotation. But for us, just the term popular culture really started to take off during World War II and was not really called pop culture until the 1960s. And it's stayed with us that way since then. Now, pop culture tends to change, sometimes drastically and sometimes rapidly, but sometimes it's long-lasting and it goes past different generations. So it depends on popularity and how people interpret items of popular culture. Normally it begins at a place that's unique in time. For example, the beginning of a television show that catches on and really becomes very popular. And typically, popular culture topics or ideas don't last unless they really have a broad reach, generationally and also geographically. Now, within the Smithsonian, you'll notice that we've accepted and had popular culture exhibits in the system, not only here at Air and Space, but at American History and other places for years. The Magic of Myth, the Star Wars exhibit, was one of the most popular exhibits that ever was held downtown. Star Trek, of course, also had an exhibit. In fact, we still have one of the Star Trek models down in the gift shop. And it's remarkable that if you go to the blog that is currently active on our website, people are still writing in vehement letters about the paint scheme on this model. Now, these are people that are older than you and I, many of them, who are absolutely positive that this is not painted the right way. It's amazing. It's passionate. It's great. But I'm here to tell you that popular culture bleeds out from television shows and other items that you generally think are related to popular culture in ways that we deal with here in the museum all the time. Our biggest popular culture artifact is sitting right in that building over there. That's the Starship or the shuttlecraft or the whatever, Space Shuttle Enterprise. Now originally, this airplane, this glider, was not going to be called the Enterprise. It was going to be called the Constitution. And it was a write-in campaign through legal government channels that changed the name. NASA was convinced that it had to be changed. So a popular culture idea had direct influence on what we are holding in the museum as a technology piece. It's remarkable. But our collections go way back further than that, all the way to the 1800s with popular culture items that are covered with balloons. If you've walked past the Balloonomania case that's at the far, far south end of the building, you'll notice that there's carved balloons in furniture, in chairs, on pottery, you name it. But this happens because of an aviation-related event. In 1783, the Montgolfier brothers flew a manned balloon for the first time, and after that, of course, they did it in the heartland of all that is considered good in the world, Paris, France. So everything took off from there, and it became kind of a status symbol, kind of an indication that this was an event that had a very wide and acceptable view. Let's look at the 1920s, for example, and Charles Lindbergh. If you walked this way from the south, you might have come across the Stanley King collection case, which has hundreds of artifacts related to Charles Lindbergh and his flight across the Atlantic solo in 1927. Now we've recently acquired this collection, but these objects were built and were sold and were collected in the 1920s and are still being traded today. But that is again related to an aviation event that caught the imagination of this country in a way that was generally seen as positive. He became a celebrity overnight. And with all of this celebrity and fame and the event itself, something that was challenging and heroic, we have the birth of another whole segment of popular culture. Now let's look at this in a slightly different way then. During the Korean War, the airplanes that were used during the Korean War drastically changed from the straight wing, piston-driven propeller type airplane which was used during World War II to, by the end of the war, these sleek, swept-back, jet-powered fighter planes that really are what we have today. And this is a transition in aviation technology that not only did it change the way we see airplanes in their use, but it was also interpreted that way differently among the designers of this country. And let me show you a very interesting example of how this kind of thought process and design affected what we take for granted as normal. Let's look at the automobile. The DeSoto in 1950 and 52, called the Fire Dome. It looks like a tank. This is before the advent of the jet engine. Now let's look at the 1954 DeSoto Ghia car, which has afterburners on it, for goodness sake. It's a remarkable shift in automobile design, which continued into the 50s. In 56 and 57, not only was the DeSoto a totally different shape, if you look at the black paint on this advertisement appealing to women to go and get their own pink DeSoto, and they weren't selling makeup in this particular ad. But you see the shape, the winglets at the end, the dots for the engines, and in 1957 they actually named the car the Fire Flight. It's all about this change in perception of what is good in design. How does that work? So another example of how aviation technologies have altered or influenced our views of popular culture. Now, of course, the space race and manned space flight has another whole swath of popular culture items that go along with it. These things in our collection, from this 2001 painting to models of astronauts standing on the moon, which I built when I was 10 myself, are very common in the 70s and even into the 80s. But these are all based on the advent of the manned spaceflight program, and I use the word manned flight loosely because this lower right-hand picture is a schoolmate of mine, Susan Helms, in that little astronaut outfit, who has the military woman's record for space flight time. and until recently held the longest space walk record. Amazing, just amazing. About 8 hours. It's a little bit longer than that now. But she's also spent an entire tour in the orbiting laboratory, 6 months in space, 5 shuttle rides, crazy, crazy stuff. But let's look at some of the popular culture items that even come before space flight. For example, these ray guns and things that when we were real little, we had these ray guns that made sparks and all that stuff. That was the coolest, wasn't it? Of course, today that's not what we have, right? That causes taking the eye out or something. But we have a large collection of these kind of things, not to mention props for movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this mothership, and a mailbox that was issued by the Postal Service during one of the anniversaries of Star Wars. And then, of course, a capsule, a Gemini capsule phone. Of course, that assumes you know what the phone is for. Some generations have never seen a phone in a phone booth. But these are all in response to imagination. We are assuming at some level that space flight is not only possible, but it's a good thing. And so we see things in our popular daily life like the Star Wars movies. It goes back as far as the comic books of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers in the 20s and 30s, and then of course Close Encounters of the Third Kind film as well. The list goes on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that right now. Transformers was filmed here a couple of years back. Part of it was the second movie. But the real importance to me as the curator for this exhibit that's right behind you is that the things that you see in this case tell a story. And that story has to do with design of objects. Now let's look at these that are in this picture right here and in the case behind you. The red and white ones are the very first Jetfire Transformers that were made in 1985. Fairly complicated for that time, but made with slide rules and graph paper, etc. Now this other Jetfire, which is our SR-71 that turns into a robot, not only as a toy, but in the movie, is very recent. It is the most complex toy that Hasbro has ever made. And Hasbro's been around since the late 1800s. Now, how is this possible? How can we go from this rather simplistic toy to something that's complicated and very difficult? It took me 2.5 hours to put it from one to another kind of a figure. It's done by computational power. Now, Lockheed Martin actually gave Hasbro the plans to the SR-71. You'll check the boxes. Lockheed Martin is on the toy box. They gave them the plans, and there is a step that goes between that airplane to that robot. Somebody draws the robot, and then there's this magic inside of a computer that takes that airplane and makes it into parts, and it turns into a robot. Now, the first computers that helped our astronauts go to space were about, added up together, half again as big as that case that you're standing by. The computational power used to do this fits in a laptop computer, can be carried around by anybody, and has more gigabytes of memory than you can possibly imagine. Computer power. None of this is possible without computational power. And it's not just about toys. It's not that frivolous. It's about everything we do today is impacted by computational power. Of course, it changes the way we play with toys. That's true. You have to make a choice on what am I going to do today? Am I going to play with an airplane, or do I have to turn it into a robot that takes me 2.5 hours to do? Now that's choice one. It's not like a G.I. Joe. It's something totally different to how we manipulate things. And it's supposed to be really good for you. Dexterity when you're younger, gets your mind working a little bit more than taking a G.I. Joe with a gun and pointing it at somebody else. So there are societal changes that are going on with how these things work. They're only possible with creativity, imagination, thinking out of the box. How does this work? And it's a really good topic, and it affects you in your generation, and you, and you, and you. Everything we do is based on computational power. Now, in the end, all of this popular culture explosion that happens after certain events, the how is really the different part. It's not the what. We still make games, we still make toys, we still make furniture, things that we accept as popular items, but what's changed is the technology by which we utilize these objects. What is so impossible about having a robot like C-3PO? We have that robot in our collection. It's in this building. You can't see it right now because it's in a box, but that robot was built before the movies came out. Somebody was imagining this. What is so impossible that these are games that came out after Lindbergh's flight? Now we still play games related to these kind of aviation and space-related topics, but they're all on a computer. We have Wii's where we can do exercise and play tennis and bowl, and we never leave the comfort of our own living room. So there's a lot of irony with popular culture. Like I said, if you have the view that it's dumbed down for everybody to understand, the great irony is that it uses some of the most high-tech things that we know of to get this message across. Some of the most high-powered computers, the largest databases, the hugest bandwidths, all of that stuff goes into a lot of these popular culture items that we've been talking about today. Jetfire, the robot to a plane, could not have been done without special software and computational power. It just couldn't be done. So what you're looking at when you look in that case is an evolution not in toys but in technology that impacts our space program. I can fly a Predator airplane over Afghanistan while I'm living and working in Las Vegas, Nevada. Bandwidth and computational power. So it affects much more than just what some would view as a trivial subject, which I would disagree with. This industry makes huge contributions to our economy, huge contributions, not only with action-adventure films, but computer technology from California to China to you name it. It's everywhere and it's pervasive, but it also links generations together. You know, the theme song from the Transformers movie was done by a band that probably all of you have heard of, AC/DC. Other themes have been done by Aerosmith and Linkin Park. These are rock bands that we all know, a lot of us do, and generations know them. When I look at that case, I see families come up here where the son says, oh, that's the coolest toy ever, and the dad says, oh, but I had the very first one, so what's cooler now? And then they go back and forth at it. It crosses generations. The idea is, and this is key with aviation, it's key with space design, it's key with this industry, it's about imagination. If you can imagine it, it can happen. Is it so impossible to believe that this airplane that does this in flight, it turns into a hovering thing that doesn't look like an airplane at all? This exists, this isn't make-believe, but somebody had to think of it. All these ray guns and things like that that were thought of in the 20s and 30s. Is it so hard to believe that it's possible now that we have an airborne laser that can shoot down a missile with ray, like a ray gun? It's real, but it comes out of somebody's mind. Is it so impossible to believe that this could happen with our SR-71? And when you watch the movie, I guarantee you believe it. Great that you're here. Do you have some questions for me today? I'd be happy to answer them for you. Okay, well, enjoy your day here at the Air and Space Museum, and I'll be standing around for a few minutes if you want to talk. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Ask an Expert. A companion question and answer session for this lecture may also be available. For a schedule of upcoming Ask an Expert lectures at the museum, please visit www.nasm.si.edu.